Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The question of origin has always intrigued humans. Countless scientists and researchers have devoted their lives to it. In a post-pandemic world, this is also a political question. What is the origin of the pandemic? Where did the virus come from? Did it leak from a laboratory? And I've lost count of how many times I've asked this question in the last year and a half. Or how many stories we've done on evidence supporting this theory. The last US president was mocked for asking this question. The current US president is being cheered for asking the same question. And not just that, Joe Biden has now ordered a new investigation into the origin of the virus. He has told American intelligence agencies that he wants a report in 90 days. China says any probe should begin with American military facilities. As for American intelligence, they claimed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction only to steal its oil. These are Beijing's arguments. What does all of this tell you? That America perhaps knows something about a possible lab leak. And China is already training guns to dismiss that report. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the full story. Also on the show, Twitter says India's new laws are undemocratic. The government says protecting free speech in India is not the prerogative of a private foreign entity. We'll bring you the details of the latest clash. Why are vaccines linked to blood clots? Can they be prevented? German scientists say that they have found the answers. What is the French president doing in Rwanda? What explains his increased engagements in Africa? We'll bring you a special report. And humans could live up to 150 years, but global life expectancy right now is half of that. What is the secret to a long life? You don't want to miss the story. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The Dominican government confirms that fugitive Indian businessman Mehul Choksi is indeed in their custody. Dominica says it is trying to ascertain some details about Choksi's citizenship, after which he might be repatriated to Antigua. In an exclusive interview to WION earlier, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, said that Choksi could be sent back to India in the next 48 hours. More than 5 billion people in Australia's second biggest city of Melbourne ordered into a snap week-long lockdown as officials blame a sluggish vaccine rollout and quarantine failure for another outbreak. Restrictions apply to surrounding Victoria State also, as the COVID cluster doubled to 26 cases. According to officials, Azeri troops have captured 6 Armenian soldiers on Armenia's border. This is the latest incident in continuing tensions since fighting erupted between the two sides last year. Both sides confirmed the incident in the Kalbajar region, which lies west of the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh territory. Thousands took to the streets of the rebel-held city of Idlib in a boisterous rally against the Syrian presidential elections as voting began in government-held areas of Syria, set to give President Bashar al-Assad a fourth 7-year term. Protesters call the election farcical and illegitimate, while the US and European powers have said it is neither free nor fair. The UN Civil Aviation Agency will hold an urgent meeting to discuss Belarus after Western powers on the UN Security Council called for the body to investigate Minsk's diversion of a European flight and arrest of a dissident. The agency will meet as the consequences of the incident play out in Europe's airspace, with multiple nations banning Belarusian carriers. The head of a Japanese doctors' union says that holding the Olympic Games in Tokyo this summer with tens of thousands of people around the world could lead to an emergence of an Olympic coronavirus strain. This as Japan has pledged to hold a safe and secure 2020 Olympics despite a fourth wave of infections. In the latest shooting rampage to rock the nation in recent weeks, a gunman opened fire at a Northern California rail yard, killing at least 9 people. The gunman was employed at a Transportation Authority light rail hub and died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Thousands of people scrambled to flee the Congolese city of Goma, some picking their way across landscapes scarred with lava, after officials said a second volcanic eruption could happen any time. 31 people were killed when Mount Nyiragongo, one of the world's most active volcanoes, sent a wall of lava towards the city, destroying 17 villages on the way. Villarreal has been crowned Europa League champions after stunning Manchester United in a marathon penalty shootout. Gerard Moreno's opener for the Spaniards was cancelled out by Edinson Cavani, but neither team could find a winner even after extra time. The first 21 kicks of shootout all found the back of the net, but United keeper David Gea missed his effort to hand Unai Emery's Villarreal the first major title in the club's history. Europe's biggest football clubs are in the midst of a managerial upheaval. Antonio Conte has resigned as Inter Milan's head coach just days after leading them to their first Serie A title in a decade. Fellow Italian giants Juventus are set to sack Andrea Pirlo after a disappointing campaign and appoint Massimiliano Allegri. Zinedine Zidane has also stepped down as Real Madrid manager for the second time following the club's first trophy-less season in 11 years.
After a major drop last week, India's pandemic numbers are holding steady. In the last 24 hours, India has reported more than 200,000 new cases. Tamil Nadu has replaced Maharashtra as the top contributor. Active cases are more than 2.4 million. They dropped by over 75,000 yesterday. As many as 25 states have reported a decline in active cases since last week. 25 states. India's recovery rate is 90%. In the last 24 hours, more than 280,000 patients recovered. This takes India's total recoveries beyond the 24 million mark since last year. But no major fall in fatalities yet, and that is the worrying number. India reported more than 3,800 deaths on Wednesday. The way out of all of this is vaccination. And India is trying to procure more jabs. Countries which pursued aggressive vaccination are better placed now. Countries like the United States, Israel and the United Kingdom, they have limited new infections, and now we have more research in favor of vaccines. Here's why you should get your shot. The immunity they give may last for years. That's what a group of scientists has found. They published their findings in British science journal Nature. This is what they say. Immunity after an infection lasts at least a year and possibly a lifetime. That's a big range. Immunity improves over time, especially after vaccination. How does that happen? These scientists studied the patients who had a mild infection at least a year back. They identified antibody-producing cells in their bone marrows. These cells hide within bones and they can produce antibodies for decades. And on this basis, scientists believe that vaccination should have the same effect. And these findings, combined with recent studies, lead us to some really promising possibilities. Experts believe that those who were infected before may not need booster shots because their bodies should be able to produce a robust immune response. And those who haven't been infected might need boosters, plus a small minority who got infected but did not produce a major immune response. So if you've recovered from the virus, you're perhaps better placed than the rest. But that doesn't mean you take off the mask just yet. Those rules have not changed. In the last 17 months, we have learned a lot about defending ourselves from the Wuhan virus. But we still don't know how it originated. We still don't have clear answers on what led to this outbreak. How did the pandemic begin in China? Did the virus come from a laboratory? The evidence is mounting and America wants to investigate. The president has given the marching orders. American intelligence agencies will probe this. Joe Biden wants them to quote-unquote redouble efforts to determine the origin of the Wuhan virus, and he wants a report within 90 days. Last night, the US president released a statement. It's on your screens now. This is the most expansive revelation by the US government on the question of the origins of the virus. So what does America know? This is what it says. In March this year, Joe Biden asked the US National Security Advisor to prepare a report about the origins, a summary of what they know so far, and the most up-to-date analysis. And Biden asked his team to share what they knew about both the theories, a natural origin of the virus and a lab leak. Remember, America still holds it as a possibility, the lab leak, the possibility that the virus may have come out of a laboratory, perhaps accidentally leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They've not ruled it out. What the US does not have is evidence to reach a final conclusion. So allow me to quote from the statement. It says, as of today, the US intelligence community has coalesced around two likely scenarios but has not reached a definitive conclusion on this question. And here is their current position, I'm quoting, while two elements in the IC leans towards the former scenario and one leans more towards the latter, each with low or moderate confidence. What does that mean? It means that the United States intelligence community, IC, is split. One half believes that the virus is natural in its origin, and the other half does not rule out a lab leak. So they will investigate both angles together. Joe Biden has now asked them for a definitive conclusion, and he wants China to answer some tough questions. In a statement, Biden said, and I'm quoting again, as part of that report, I have asked for areas of further inquiry that may be required, including specific questions for China. The United States believes Beijing was not transparent with the investigators who went to Wuhan earlier this year.
We've been pretty vocal, right? This administration, we didn't have access. China wasn't transparent enough. We have been saying that for a very long time, that China needed to provide more access to the lab, cooperate more fully with the scientific investigators, and we don't think that they have met that standard.
China needed to provide more access to the lab. That statement sums it up. The United States believes that the lab leak angle needs to be explored further. And if you've been following our coverage in recent days, we have been telling you about the growing circumstantial evidence that needs to be explored and investigated. Number one is the claim that researchers at the Wuhan lab fell sick in November 2019. Apparently, they were admitted to hospital. This was before China officially reported its first confirmed infection. November 2019. The WHO team wanted raw data to better understand the early days of the outbreak, and it's a request that China refused. The second point that we have been focusing on is the research that was going on inside the Wuhan laboratory. The Wuhan Institute of Virology has been studying bat coronaviruses for years now. Did the Wuhan lab have any sample of this particular virus before the pandemic began? This is the question that also needs to be answered. And China will have to face these tough questions again. But China is already crying foul. It is deflecting all demands for any further investigation. Today, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent Zhao Lijian to face the press, the same diplomat who is known as the wolf warrior in chief, also the man who floated a conspiracy theory last year. Zhao Lijian said last year that the virus had come from America and not from Wuhan. And when he said this, the Chinese state distanced itself from those statements, those comments. But today, from the podium of China's foreign ministry, the very same man, Zhao Lijian, revived his conspiracy theory, and he said investigators should first probe the Fort Detrick lab in America.
The US ranks highest in the world with more than 33 million confirmed cases and 600,000 deaths from COVID-19. Instead of deeply reflecting on itself, the US is trying to blame China. I would like to ask what is their intention and where is their conscience. I also want to stress that the Fort Detrick base is suspicious and the US still has more than 200 other biological laboratories spread around the world. How many secrets are they hiding?
Then Zhao trained his guns on the US intelligence community. He brought up the story of how America invaded Iraq. Remember, the US government under George Bush insisted that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. They invaded Iraq on the pretext of destroying those weapons. Well, they found none, and they helped themselves to the oil wells of Iraq. Why is China raising all of this now? To discredit America and its intelligence agencies.
I would also like to stress one final point. The motive and purpose of the US-driven investigation, relying on intelligence, is crystal clear. In fact, US intelligence has a notorious track record, as the world has learnt a long time ago. Its masterpieces include the test tube of laundry powder, which was cited as the evidence of weapons of mass destruction, and the staged White Helmets video to launch strikes on Syria. Former US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo even boasted, quoting, "I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. We had entire training courses." It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment. How can anyone trust the findings of an investigation conducted by such an intelligence organization with no credibility to speak of?
That's how China has been trying to shift attention and blame for the pandemic, questioning the credibility of others. The WHO report that was co-authored by Chinese scientists practically ruled out the lab leak. But the WHO chief, Dr. Tedros, refused to accept that conclusion. Now, America is investigating this angle. If China was hoping that the WHO-led investigation would kill the lab leak debate, the compromised probe has only given it more momentum. We'll be tracking this. And the origins debate is still a mystery, as we said, but there appears to be some headway on the vaccine front. Another mystery that gripped the world a couple of months back, the reports of blood clots among people who got the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It nearly derailed the vaccination drive. Many countries stopped using these two vaccines. Some of them still do not. But experts kept recommending these jabs, even though they had no idea what was causing the blood clots. In Germany, a group of scientists says they may have cracked the code. And it turns out they even have a solution for the problem. Here's a report.
It's the side effect that almost killed a vaccine, a condition that became ammunition for anti-vaxxers, the blood clot. Is it really a side effect, a statistical event, or just mass hysteria? A group of German scientists may have the answer. There's a lot of medical jargon here, so try to keep up. The clot risks were linked to two vaccines, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Both of them are adenovirus-based vaccines. Here's a quick explainer. Adenoviruses are the harmless kind, like the ones that give you a cold or a fever. Nothing life-threatening. Scientists can actually hack these adenoviruses, disable their ability to cause illness, and retain their capacity to enter cells. This makes them the perfect vector. Think of adenoviruses as an envelope. Inside this envelope is a message. It teaches our cells how to grow the spike proteins of the Wuhan virus. Not the virus itself, just the spike proteins. Once our body sees this foreign object, it gets to work. It's pretty impressive technology, but the current lot of vaccines have one problem. The adenoviruses are entering the cell's nucleus. Think of it as the heart and brain of your cells. Weak or not, the viruses entering the cell's nucleus is bad news. Once this happens, the spike protein breaks up, and part of it float around in your body. In some rare cases, these broken parts can lead to blood clots. What about mRNA vaccines? They deliver the vector to the cellular fluid, so the question of entering the nucleus doesn't arise. This study is yet to be peer-reviewed, but if this is indeed causing the blood clots, what is the solution? Scientists in Germany make it sound ridiculously easy. Just tell the spike protein not to split apart. How? By changing the genetic message inside the adenovirus envelope. Johnson & Johnson has already reached out to the scientists. The company said, "We are supporting continued research and analysis of this rare event as we work with medical experts and global health authorities. We look forward to reviewing and sharing data as it becomes available." Blood clot fears have disrupted vaccination, especially in Europe. The UK has reported 309 cases in 33 million people. The European Union has reported 142 cases in 16 million recipients. Both the WHO and the European Medicines Agency back the vaccines, but hesitancy remains. Denmark, Austria and Norway have stopped using AstraZeneca's jabs. This theory from Germany is one among dozens. Like every scientific study, this one too sounds solid. But until the peer review is complete, we can't draw conclusions. Except maybe this one: the vaccines still work. The cure is better than the disease. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
The World War was one of the most destructive conflicts in history. After the war ended, the Allied forces in Germany signed the Treaty of Versailles. The document was vengeful. Harsh terms were imposed on Germany. It was slapped with weapon restrictions. Germany was also stripped of its colonies, while on the face of it, the treaty was codifying peace. It failed to resolve the very issues that triggered the war. What was the result? The Treaty of Versailles fueled ultra-nationalistic sentiments in Germany and paved the way for Hitler's rise. The rest, as they say, is history. Why am I telling you about this tonight? Because most of us do not learn from history. How else will you explain this? 2 world wars and numerous conflicts later, we still prefer cornering a country after a war instead of looking for a lasting resolution. Case in point, what's happening in Geneva right now. The United Nations Human Rights Council, or the UNHRC, is holding a special session. On its agenda is Israel, a country that has just come out of an 11-day-long conflict with Gaza. Both Israel and Gaza claim victory. Both fired rockets at each other. Both sustained casualties. But in the eyes of some nations, it is Israel alone that must be held accountable. Israel is being accused of war crimes, and some UNHRC members want an arms embargo against Israel. Hence the special session. It was called to address the quote-unquote grave human rights situation in occupied Palestinian territories. Who requested for this session? You wouldn't believe if I told you. It was Pakistan. This serial human rights abuser is a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Sounds paradoxical? Wait till you hear about the other members. China is one of them, a country that carries out human rights abuses on an industrial scale, as we've told you. Let me give you a quick primer. The United Nations Human Rights Council was founded in the year 2006. Its aim was to promote and protect all human rights around the globe. 47 states were tasked with the job. The Council's membership is rotational. So elections are held every 3 years. Members are elected by the General Assembly through direct and secret ballot. 13 seats are reserved for African states, 13 for states in the Asia-Pacific, 8 for Latin American and Caribbean countries, 7 seats are for Western European and other states, and 6 seats for Eastern European countries. So does the Council ensure equitable seat distribution? Clearly it does. Well done on that count. But what about merit? Does the Council ensure that those being tasked with protecting human rights or delivering justice in cases of human rights abuse are not guilty of abuse themselves? Let me answer this with another question. Which countries come to your mind when you think of human rights abuse? I can guarantee you all of them are members of UNHRC. China, check. Pakistan, check. Russia, it was elected unopposed. So was Cuba. Is this a mockery of a multilateral body, or is it a mockery of human rights? Well, we'll leave that for you to decide. But this council has now decided that it wants to punish Israel. Listen to the High Commissioner of United Nations Human Rights Council.
Found to be indiscriminate and disproportionate in their impact on civilians and civilian objects, such attacks may constitute war crimes. On the other hand, it is also a violation of international humanitarian law to locate military assets in densely populated civilian areas or to launch attacks from them.
As we speak, the session is still underway, and it will be interesting to see what comes out of it, and we will keep you posted. But here's something that you must know. The Council has a very questionable record when it comes to Israel. Consider this. Till date, the UNHRC has held 30 special sessions, 30. 9 of them were on Israel. So 30% of its special sessions were Israel-centric. There are 2 items in the UNHRC's permanent agenda that refer to human rights in specific countries, and one of these items deals solely with Israel. The second covers all the other member states. Can a fair decision be expected from a council so biased? And I want to put this on record. This is not about absolving Israel. If Israel has committed war crimes, it must be probed and punished if found guilty, and that should hold true for any country. But this call cannot be taken by a world body that's been hijacked by totalitarian regimes. How can countries like Pakistan be allowed to sit in judgment of others? Must we remind the United Nations that Islamabad itself is being probed for terror financing? Countries like Venezuela and Cuba backed Pakistan's call for a special session. Quick reminder, China is guilty of orchestrating a genocide. My point is simple. Probe human rights abuses by all means, but let that probe be fair and free. The Israel-Palestine conflict is complex. It involves history, it involves land, religion. The problem cannot be solved by singling out or cornering one side. I've said this before and I'll say it again. What West Asia needs is to find a sustainable resolution to this problem. And the United Nations Human Rights Council is not equipped to do that. It has reduced itself to becoming a political tool in the hands of some countries. Lawlessness can never be the answer, whether it is for regimes, private companies, or even individuals. It's like what they say about the Wild West. In the end, every town needs a sheriff. That's what the government of India is trying to do, to regulate a space that has enjoyed complete freedom. Social media. This was always going to be controversial because you cannot bracket the internet as good or bad, and social media companies know this. And they leverage this. We have been reporting on the ongoing spat between Twitter and the government of India. It's a classic example of the good versus bad debate. And today, both sides stepped up the offensive. Twitter says it is concerned about its employees and their safety. Let me pull out their statement. This is what they've said. Right now, we are concerned by recent events regarding our employees in India and the potential threat to freedom of expression for the people we serve. Twitter has raised 3 broad issues. Number 1 is obviously about its employees in India. Number 2 is about the new regulations, having a compliance officer in India, a 24/7 grievance redressal mechanism, and so on, the new rules that India introduced 3 months back. Twitter believes that these rules are undemocratic. And number 3, Twitter wants to extend the deadline. It wants India to publish the protocols of regulations, and they want 3 months to review these protocols. How has the government of India responded? It has assured Twitter that there is no risk to its employees and they will always remain safe in India. But on the second accusation, the government has pushed back hard. This is how the IT ministry in India responded. Twitter's statement is an attempt to dictate its terms to the world's largest democracy. Through its actions and deliberate defiance, Twitter seeks to undermine India's legal system. Strong words from both sides indeed. This is essentially a turf battle. Big tech feels the internet is their domain. No outside authority has the right to interfere. The government says internet is populated by people and it is their right to protect the people. It is also their job to protect the people. Which argument has more merit then? Unregulated social media has many pitfalls: fake news, defamation, cyberbullying. These are all problems that concern citizens, so it is natural for a government to interfere. But the question is, how far can this interference go? Let's look at two issues that Twitter keeps raising. Holding a compliance officer legally accountable for content, is that really asking too much? In the United States, the CEO himself is filtering content. He is banning former presidents. He's deleting tweets and pleading before the Congress. But outside America, big tech goes rogue. Today, Twitter said it wants to protect the privacy of Indians. But that's not exactly a company's job. Privacy is a fundamental right in India. If the government violates it, we have courts for redressal. The second issue that Twitter keeps talking about is monitoring. Will they be forced to unlock encryption? Will we end up in a surveillance age? Now, these predictions are a bit premature, and I'll tell you why. In the United States, the government is always asking for backdoor decryption. The FBI has been asking Apple to unlock iPhones for a long time, but nobody called America a surveillance state. The fact is, this is uncharted territory. Nobody knows what regulated social media will look like. There is no playbook for governments to look at. Right now, it is about deploying a system and addressing problems as they come. Do we need checks? Of course we do. There are dozens of agencies monitoring what the government does, and it's only fair that big tech has the same scrutiny. All of this then boils down to accountability. Who is accountable to the people of India? A company based in the United States or a government elected by the people of India? This was the Indian government statement in a nutshell. Let me once again quote for you. Protecting free speech in India, and this is what the government of India is saying, protecting free speech in India is not the prerogative of a private, for-profit, foreign entity like Twitter, but it is the commitment of the world's largest democracy. Twitter keeps talking about cooperation and constructive dialogue, but in India, they're doing the opposite apparently. Take their Indian subsidiary's managing director, for instance. This is how the Delhi police has described his actions. Twitter India's subsidiary, TCIPL's managing director, chose to adopt a path of evasiveness instead of cooperation. Initially, TCIPL's managing director shared in his response that he was merely a sales head. He had no role whatsoever in any operations relating to content. It is to be noted that TCIPL's stance that its managing director is a mere sales head runs contrary to his very own previous press interviews, where he elaborately discussed Twitter's plan to devise methods to identify abusive and manipulative content. Basically, the MD claims to be a sales head. That's what the Delhi police is saying. So how does this war of words end? WhatsApp has a lawsuit pleading against the new laws in India. We don't know what the courts are thinking or what they will decide eventually. But one thing is certain. We need regulation. The internet cannot be the Wild West anymore. Big tech must accept their new reality. And then we can move on to the next step, which is a meaningful conversation on regulation. Because right now, amid all of this back and forth, the actual guidelines and proposals are getting buried. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is seeking forgiveness, not for something that he did, but for a genocide that happened 27 years ago. The French president is visiting Rwanda. Today he admitted that France had a role to play in a genocide that killed 800,000 Rwandans in 1994. But why is Macron expressing regret now? because he wants to make Africa a key part of his foreign policy. Our next report tells you more about Macron's pivot to Africa.
Only those who went through that night can perhaps forgive, and so could give us the gift of forgiving ourselves. Dibuka, dibuka, dibuka.
Rwandans have waited for this since 1994. It took 27 years for a French president to seek forgiveness from Rwanda. This speech by Emmanuel Macron is a reset. In April 1994, around 800,000 people were slaughtered in just 100 days. France was accused of backing those who oversaw this genocide. For years, Paris has denied this charge. But Macron now wants to turn a page. He wants to rebuild ties with Rwanda. He has sent an ambassador after 6 years, but stopped short of delivering a full apology. Nonetheless, the Rwandan leadership welcomed the French president's statement.
The president has just made an important statement at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. This was a powerful speech with a special meaning for what is taking place now and which will resonate well beyond Rwanda. His words were something more valuable than an apology.
Since taking office in 2017, Macron has made Africa a major part of the French foreign policy. His focus goes beyond former French colonies. Throughout the month of May, France has paid special attention to Africa. It began with an international conference to support the Sudan. France gave the Sudan a bridge loan worth $1.5 billion to cover the debt it owed to the International Monetary Fund, and worked to raise a donation worth $2 billion from the United Kingdom, the United States, the European Union, and others. The very next day, Macron hosted around 24 African heads of state for a summit. The leadership of the World Bank and the IMF were also in the room. Together, they discussed how Africa's debt and post-pandemic recovery can be managed. The outcome was a restructuring of African debt through a combination of grants and funding. Macron is now on an important tour of Africa. He is trying to strengthen ties with the continent. After Rwanda, he will travel to South Africa. Macron is scheduled to meet South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The French president wants to support Ramaphosa's efforts to boost vaccination in Africa. Macron's proactive engagements with the region could extend the French sphere of influence. What could hamper his efforts are his growing domestic challenges. Bureau Report, World is One.
Now let's trace the journey of climate change. First, it was the responsibility of activists. They had their small protests and meetings. Then it became the people's responsibility. So we got electric cars, we got sustainable products. Soon we realized that governments too can make a difference. Their laws can cut greenhouse emissions and legalize green alternatives. And when the governments fell short, courts started stepping in. Today, climate litigation is extremely common. Citizens are taking their governments to court. Judges are pulling up ministers for reckless approvals and policies. Our next report is about one such landmark ruling in Australia.
Inactive government equals student activism. That's what it says on this young girl's placard. She is one of 8 teenagers who sued the Australian government. What did they want? Clean air and green surroundings. Hanging in the balance was Australia's big-ticket project, the Vickery mine in New South Wales. The owners were seeking permission to expand the mine, but that's when the children stepped in. They filed a lawsuit demanding the proposal be scrapped. Thursday was their day in court. It was a day of mixed feelings. because the judge ended up throwing out the lawsuit, but not before he pulled up the government.
Having weighed and balanced those considerations, the court is satisfied that a duty of care should be recognised. Accordingly, the court has determined that the minister has a duty of care to take reasonable care not to cause the children personal injury when exercising her power under Section 130 and 133 of the EPPC Act to approve or not approve the extension project.
It's a landmark ruling in Australia. The court has basically told the government every project you approve adds to climate change. So take some responsibility. This puts the Environment Minister on the spot. Accountability to the cabinet is one thing, accountability to a whole generation is unheard of.
It is a historic judgment. The court has found that the minister owes a duty of care to younger children, to vulnerable people, and that duty says that the minister must not act in a way that causes harm, future harm of climate change to younger people.
This judgment could set a global precedent. More and more countries are suing their government over climate change. There have been lawsuits in India, Britain, Indonesia and South Africa. Most of them inconclusive. But ministerial accountability may be the only way to get things done. Because climate change is not a faraway threat anymore. It is already here. Look at the subcontinental cyclones, for instance, Yas and Tauktae. 2 in the space of a week. Experts say climate change is making cyclones more common and also more ferocious. Cyclones draw energy from warm waters. Thanks to global warming, our seas are hotter than ever. This means climate change could soon cause visible destruction. Stronger winds, stronger rains, and more flash floods. So the world needs to start re-evaluating disaster preparedness. It is not just about evacuation drills anymore. We cannot afford supercharged hurricanes and cyclones. And to keep them in science fiction, climate action needs to be legalized. If a finance minister can be fired for a recession, why not fire an environment minister for rising temperatures? Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
In Britain, they say, long live the Queen. In India, while blessing you, in fact, elders often say, may you live a long life. But how long can we really live? How long can a human life possibly be? The oldest person currently alive is 118 years old. Her name is Kane Tanaka. She lives in Japan's Fukuoka. A woman named Jean-Louise Calment has lived the longest till date. She was 122 years and 164 days old. That's a long life, right? Seems almost unimaginable. But research says you can live even longer than that. It is possible for us to live up to 150 years. This is what researchers in Singapore and New York have found. They say that it is between the ages of 120 and 150 that humans display a complete loss of resilience, meaning we lose the ability to recover. 150 is more than double the world's current average lifespan, which is 72.81 years. That's the average lifespan. If you're watching us from India, there's bad news. For our average lifespan is way below the global average. It's currently 69 years. So what do we need to do in order to live longer? In 2016, a woman named Emma Morano was the oldest living person then. 2016. She was asked the secret to her long life, and she gave all the credit to eggs. Morano said, and I'm quoting, "I eat 2 eggs a day and that's it, and cookies. But I do not eat much because I have no teeth." A lot of books and bestsellers promise the secret to a long life. You must have heard of Ikigai. It's Japanese for a reason for being. A book by that name is the current social media favorite. It also promises to reveal the secret of a long life. Ask the person next to you, what must be done in order to live long, and you're likely to get an answer on these lines: stop smoking, stop drinking, and so on. But Jean Clement, the oldest person ever, only gave up smoking at the age of 120. And she once said, her secret to long life is olive oil, port, and chocolate. So my point is, even if there is a secret, it cannot be applied universally. What does science say? Let's look at the Longevity Project. It is one of the largest ever studies on life expectancy. It says that people who are relaxed do not necessarily live longer. Then who does? People who are prudent, persistent, well organized. They're known as the conscientious people. Scientists say that these people tend to make healthier choices, which includes who they marry and where they work. The study also bursts some popular myths. Number one, don't work so hard and you will stay healthy. Wrong, says the Longevity Project. Religious people live longer. Again, wrong. Thinking happy thoughts reduces stress and leads to long life. Wrong, apparently. Get married and you will live longer. Definitely wrong. Retire as soon as you can and play more golf to stay healthy and live longer. Wrong and wrong. So when should we retire? A neuroscientist was recently asked this question, and he answered, even if you're physically impaired, it's best to keep working, never retire. The Longevity Project also says work stress is not necessarily bad for you. Several studies show that genetics and diet play a sizable role in deciding how long we live. What kind of diet? Let's look at blue zones. What are blue zones? Places on Earth where people consistently live over 100 years. Which are these places? Okinawa in Japan, Icaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, and Loma Linda in the United States. Look at this map. All close to the sea. Places where people live more than 100 years. What do people living here normally eat? 95% of their food comes from plant or plant-based products. They also eat a lot of lentils and beans. And while they eat fish, meat is eaten only around 5 times a month. People living in blue zones also have other things in common, and some scientists have listed it out for us. This is from the paper in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. It says the world's longest lived people do not pump iron, run marathons, or join gyms. Instead, they live in environments that constantly nudge them into moving without thinking about it. People living in the blue zones grow gardens. They have a purpose in life. Okinawans call it ikigai. Nicoyans call it plan de vida. Okinawans stop eating when they are 80% full. This mantra is called hara hachi bu. Centenarians in the blue zones put their families first. Aging parents, grandparents, they stay at home or nearby. And since we're speaking about life expectancy and longevity, here's something worth noting. Your life expectancy changes with age and time. As you age, your life expectancy decreases. A country's average life expectancy also grows as it progresses. This is very interesting. In the 1800s, life expectancy in India was 25.4 years. In 1950, it was 35.21. In 1980, a little more than 53 years. 1990, 57 years. And now we are at 69.96 years. How can we live longer than our average lifespan? I'm afraid I don't have the secret. And given a choice, I would say I'd pick a shorter but healthier and more fulfilling life. Whatever your choice, here's wishing you all good health. Now, for vaccines, there are varying mass vaccination campaigns across the globe, some swift, well-planned and effective, others not so much. Governments are trying to get their citizens vaccinated, but Russia has gone one step ahead. It is not going to leave behind its furry friends. In the month of March, Russia announced the world's first Wuhan virus vaccine for animals. And in many parts of the country, animals are already being jabbed.
Countries across the globe are doing their best to get their citizens inoculated, while others are still scrambling to acquire enough vaccines, and some do not have a plan in place still. Meanwhile, in Russia, a mass vaccination drive for animals has begun. Yes, you heard that right. Russia is determined to protect its furry companions.
We started vaccination of domestic animals against COVID-19. Yesterday, in Russian cities, were delivered first batches of Coronavac-CoV, the only such vaccine in the world. It was developed by a Russian scientist.
There is, of course, another reason here. There have been concerns over the risk of transmission between humans and animals. Even though this is rare at this stage, the World Health Organization has voiced concern over the same. As per Russian regulators, this vaccine can address these concerns. The Coronavac-CoV is said to protect vulnerable species.
Those coronavirus strains we see now, all of them, according to the scientists, originated from the cross-species transfer of the coronavirus. So the vaccine preventing the disease from spreading among animals also prevents the appearance of new strains among humans.
Russian regulators also claim that this vaccine can help prevent further viral mutations. And if all goes well, soon these vaccines will be available in various other countries across the globe.
We now work on registration for the vaccine in the European Union. Poland, Germany and Hungary have taken an active stand on this topic. We also held some talks with Thailand, Japan, Malaysia. Tomorrow we will discuss the possibility of registration and delivering our vaccine to Peru.
Bureau Report WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.